Angela Barranco. Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into the climate world and eventually became executive director of Climate Group North America?
Yes, no, thank you. And really excited to chat with you. It's kind of a funny story. I always tell people like especially folks who know me from DC, like they know me as a political person. I've worked on campaigns for many years and but actually I was trained as a conservation biologist and I joke that it was actually climate that radicalized me as a political person, not the other way around. And so I actually started as a scientist learning about conservation and all the incredible like biodiversity in the world, and read this really interesting but very challenging book called The Skeptical Environmentalist, which was an early climate denial book funded by fossil fuel interests. And I was just really shocked, like as a scientist, I was like, but this doesn't make any sense. Like this. So I uh ended up doing a fellowship on the Hill, and I was like, so like, well, I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna share the science and folks are really gonna be engaged. It's gonna be great. And then I came up here came to DC for the first time and I was like, oh, this is not how this works at all. And kind of fell in love at the same time with this sort of understanding of how to make change. And so I worked in the Hill. I worked in campaigns and politics for many years, kind of understanding like that side of it and how you really persuade people, not necessarily on climate, but just in general. What do people also care about? Why are they making these decisions? Like, I was truly a scientist in my early years in my approach on how to do it. And then, about halfway through my career was to date, I've been like, I think I want to go back into climate. And so after the Obama campaign, I had the opportunity to join the White House, where I led all of the climate, energy, and environment engagement. And so then sort of got myself back on that track, but with a whole set of, political ninja skills that I say I developed over that decade of political work that I feel like have been really important and are increasingly important to the climate world every day. So that's how I ended up here.
Great. Well, let's talk about Climate Week. What's going to be different at this year's Climate Week? What are you most excited about? How has the landscape changed over the years?
Absolutely. Well, this will be my fourth climate week, I believe. So I've been in the role a little more than 3 years. And um, what's been so exciting, I think, for me is to see that, with a very, very different landscape that we live in this year, politically and socially in so many different ways than we were a year ago, that the interest and the engagement around Climate Week is unabated. Like essentially, we're on track to have the same number of events practically as we had last year, or very close to that. And that's pretty incredible. It just goes to show the sort of breadth of interest across sectors or across communities in addressing climate change and being a part of the solution making, right? So what we have seen, and especially with Climate Week as the largest private gathering in the world on climate, and last year we had over 900 events across the city, plus many virtual events, and I don't even know how to calculate the number of people who participated, right? But other than just like great meetings and doing this thing, what we get is sort of insight and view into all the different industrial sectors, right, who are working on this, the different community groups who are thinking about it, government sector, from a global level all the way through, your local, city councils and everything like that. So what is really beautiful to see is that engagement across the board. And so I think that's been really cool. So what I think the biggest surprise is that this year's Climate Week is going to look a lot like last year's Climate Week, because I think there was so much um, let's say, unknown earlier this year, and folks being kind of concerned, obviously, that things have really changed. But knock on wood, until now, it's looking great, and folks are really excited to get together and strategize and think about how to move progress forward in a completely different landscape.
That's great. Well, I'll be up there for a couple of days. This will be my first Climate Week, so I'm really excited to see
Good.
what it's like.
Yes.
Um, Next question. Looking at DC, if you could tell policymakers one thing right now, what would it be?
Mm. I in DC policymakers.
DC or anywhere.
Well, I would say
Yeah.
DC policymakers might not be my first priority, is what I would say. I would say policymakers elsewhere is that now is the moment and the time to keep going, right? And I don't even think I have to say that. They say that to me all the time, right? And what we're seeing is so much incredible leadership happening at the state and local level. And so what I would say is, how do we support you? How do we keep you going? Like one of the things that Climate Group North America has really been thinking a lot about is policy frameworks and finance frameworks, as well as implementation frameworks in this sort of post-IRA world that we're now entering. And, with the lack of federal support, or, one would say even aggressively anti, some of these initiatives, the best thing we can do is support each other and actually collaborate. And what's been really cool to see is the sort of broader coalitions and collaborations of unusual allies, or frankly, former rivals, right, working together to get things done. And so that would be my question to those state and locals is how can we help?
That's great. So, switching gears a little bit, tell us about the biggest risk you've ever taken.
Ooh, this is a fun question. I would say, well, I'll make note of something more recently, and then I'm sure I'll think of something more fun later after we like hang up. But I think what's been interesting in this, the last 6 months, especially in DC, is there's been so much rapid change, so much aggressive movement, sort of against the status quo of what we had sort of come to appreciate as sort of like the momentum we were building for climate. And so I think there was a really a moment of mourning and a just shock, right? But what I would say is, very early on in April, we hosted one of the first big gatherings of climate leaders in DC. And it was a big risk, right? Like it was like, is anyone going to show up? Are people going to be upset we're doing this, right? We're blocks away from the White House. Um, but it really paid off because I think part of what you need in a moment of crisis is some structure to be able to move things forward, right? And so what we were able to do by being a bit bold and a little, kind of like hope and a prayer that this is going to work, right, is bring together leaders from across the US who are like, you know what, I don't know what this means yet, but I want to be in community with people who want to understand this better and who have ideas on how to move forward. And what we've seen is that has actually paid dividends all the way through this climate week, where we're hosting this thing called the American Innovation and Abundance Day as part of Climate Week to sort of continue that momentum, right? Again, it's just creating like a stickiness to all of it in the face of what can feel really daunting and just immobilizing, right? Like where you're just like, I don't even know what to do at this moment. So, and it wasn't my risk alone. My team is wonderful. And, together we kind of put this together with partners and what it's done is really snowballed into, okay, like creative new ideas. Let's do it. Like, and let's move it forward and get them funded and all that kind of great stuff. So
Terrific. What is something about you that might surprise people?
maybe that I'm a scientist, right? Like again, like especially in DC, we kind of know each other from different contexts and all this sort of stuff. And I do think it surprises people most of the time. It's like what? You're a biologist? I'm like, yeah, that's actually what brought me here. I'm not a poli-sci person. I'm not whatever. I'm a little science unicorn who is living in DC amongst my more political friends. But I think part of this is like, we all draw inspiration from, the things that we've done and the things that we've seen. And so, yeah, I've really, I'm proud of my science background and like how it really helps me every day. But it's not something that I'm like super foot forward on. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not like, hello, this is Angela Scientist. I have so many other hats I wear on a given day.
Right. Well, we need more scientists, making smart decisions for us. So glad you're doing it. Angela Barranco, thank you for joining us.
Oh my gosh, Dan, thank you. So great to chat with you. And see you at Climate Week. I'm super
See you at
excited.
Climate Week.